Hand or mechanical turn signals must be given. A. Only in city traffic. B. Only when there is traffic to the rear of your vehicle. C. Only when there is other traffic in sight. D. When changing lanes or turning. D. When changing lanes or turning. A hand or mechanical turn signal must be displayed for a minimum of 100 feet before a vehicle turns or changes lanes. The signal should be displayed for a longer distance when the vehicle is traveling at a high speed. You are coming to a railroad crossing where the crossing signals are flashing. You should A. Stop and look for a train. B. Slow down and look for a train. C. Look for a train, then speed up. D. Do what the vehicle ahead of you does. A. Stop and look for a train. When approaching a railroad crossing, you must stop your vehicle no closer than 15 feet from the nearest rail if an installed electric or mechanical signal is giving warning of an approaching train. Be aware of other warning signs that may indicate an oncoming train, including seeing a lowered crossing gate or hearing an oncoming train. You must stop at an intersection when you see A. Flashing red light. B. Steady yellow light. C. Yellow arrow. D. Flashing yellow light. A. Flashing red light. A flashing red traffic signal has the same meaning as a stop sign. At an intersection with a flashing red light, you must come to a complete stop, look both ways, and proceed only after the intersection is clear. A steady yellow traffic signal means that a fill in the blank light will soon appear. A. Flashing yellow. B. Steady green. C. Steady red. D. Flashing red. C. Steady red. A steady yellow light on a traffic signal indicates that a steady red light will soon appear.
Want to ace your DMV test? Click on the link below and get your guaranteed cheat sheet.
You are borrowing an unfamiliar vehicle from a friend. You should A. Not put too much thought into it because all vehicles are the same. B. Hide from your friend that you are unfamiliar with the vehicle. C. Disregard any obvious defects to avoid embarrassing your friend. D. Take a few minutes before driving to familiarize yourself with the operation and location of all the vehicle's equipment. D. Take a few minutes before driving to familiarize yourself with the operation and location of all the vehicle's equipment. When driving an unfamiliar vehicle, take a few minutes before driving to familiarize yourself with the location and operation of the turn signals, hazard warning signals, headlights and beam selector, windshield wipers and washers, brakes, gear selector, and horn. Any defects should be corrected before the vehicle is driven. A traffic light displaying a green arrow and a red light means that A. You may only drive straight ahead. B. You may drive only in the direction of the green arrow. C. You must wait for a solid green light to proceed in any direction. D. Vehicles moving in any direction must stop. B. You may drive only in the direction of the green arrow. If a green arrow is shown with a red light, you can only drive in the direction of the arrow and only if the intersection is clear. How long does it take, on average, to cancel the effects of one 12-ounce can of beer? A. 30 minutes. B. 1 hour. C. 45 minutes. D. 15 minutes. B. 1 hour. It takes an average of 1 hour to cancel the effects of one drink, though many factors can increase that length of time. The best policy is to not drive if you have been drinking. What is the minimum mandatory jail sentence for a first-time DUI conviction? A. 3 days. B. 10 days. C. 20 hours. D. 96 hours. A. 3 days. Driving under the influence DUI is a crime that carries a mandatory jail sentence. The minimum mandatory penalty for a DUI is 3 days in jail. Fees and fines will be charged in addition to mandatory jail time. If a driver sees an animal on the roadway, A. No special action is required. B. The driver should honk their horn. C. The driver should pass the animal as closely as possible. D. The driver should be very cautious. D. The driver should be very cautious. Be very cautious anytime you encounter an animal on the roadway. Pass the animal slowly to avoid startling or frightening it. What should you do when you see this sign? A. Look for a train station ahead. B. Signal before going any further. C. Slow down and yield for trains. D. Stop. C. Slow down and yield for trains. This sign indicates that there is a railroad crossing on the road ahead. You should always slow down when approaching a railroad crossing. Trains cannot yield to cars, so you must let them pass before crossing the tracks. You encounter a school bus stopped with its lights flashing on the opposite side of a divided highway. You should A. Proceed at a decreased speed. B. Stop until the lights stop flashing. C. Turn around. D. Continue driving. D. Continue driving. A driver may continue driving when encountering a school bus that is stopped with its lights flashing if the school bus is on the opposite side of a divided highway. Which of the following is true regarding seat belts and child restraints in vehicles? A. You should never place an infant or small child in the front seat of a vehicle with airbags. B. An airbag can be dangerous to an infant or small child, even in a low-speed collision. C. You should always make sure all your passengers are using a seat belt or child restraint. D. All of the above. D. All of the above. Before you drive, always fasten your seat belt and make sure all your passengers are using seat belts or child restraints. Studies have shown that if you use seat belts, your chances of being hurt or killed in a traffic crash are greatly reduced. Children age 12 and under should always ride properly restrained in a rear seat. Never put a rear-facing infant restraint in the front seat of a vehicle with a front passenger airbag. If you begin to feel tired while driving, the best thing to do is to A. Get some coffee. B. Open your window. C. Stop driving. D. Turn on the radio. C. Stop driving. Being fatigued while driving is similar in danger to driving under the influence of alcohol. If you begin to feel tired while driving, the best thing to do is to stop driving. What do speed limit signs indicate? A. Potential driving speeds for the area. B. The maximum or minimum speed that is legally allowed to be driven. C. The speed drivers should drive in heavy traffic. D. The speed drivers should drive under poor conditions. B. The maximum or minimum speed that is legally allowed to be driven. Speed limit signs indicate the maximum or minimum safe speed that is allowed to be driven on a roadway. The maximum limits are for ideal conditions and you must reduce your speed when conditions require it. At dusk or on overcast days, you should A. Drive using your four-way flashers. B. Drive using your parking lights. C. Not turn on any vehicle lights. D. Turn on your headlights. D. Turn on your headlights. At dusk or on overcast days, you must turn on your headlights. Dim your lights to their low beam setting when within 1,000 feet of an approaching vehicle and when within 500 feet of a vehicle that you are following. When driving in poor weather, always use your low beams. Double solid yellow lines painted down the middle of the road mean A. Railroad crossing ahead. B. Pedestrian crossing ahead. C. Passing is not permitted from either direction. D. Passing is permitted from either direction. C. Passing is not permitted from either direction. Double solid yellow lines in the center of the road mean that passing is not allowed from either direction. You may not cross the lines unless you are making a left turn or passing pedestrians, bicyclists, and riders of scooters or skateboards when the opposite lane is clear and you can pass safely. The required amount of liability insurance coverage for property damage is a minimum of A. $15,000. B. $5,000. C. $50,000. D. $25,000. D. $25,000. The mandatory insurance law requires either the vehicle owner or driver to carry liability insurance. The minimum required amount of liability insurance coverage is $25,000 for property damage. Taking drugs along with alcohol. A. Increases the risk of causing a crash. B. Is no more dangerous than consuming alcohol by itself. C. Lessens the effect of alcohol on your ability to drive. D. Has no effect on your general driving ability. A. Increases the risk of causing a crash. Drugs, including illegal, prescription, and over-the-counter medications, can affect your brain function and impair your ability to drive safely. Combining alcohol with other drugs will increase the risk of a crash. You approach an emergency vehicle that is stopped with its lights flashing. You must A. Slow down. If possible, change lanes so you will not drive next to the stopped emergency vehicle. B. Drive to the right side of the road and stop. C. Stay in your lane and continue to drive at the same speed. D. Accelerate to quickly pass the stopped vehicle. A. Slow down. If possible, change lanes so you will not drive next to the stopped emergency vehicle. If you approach an emergency vehicle, tow truck, or roadside assistance vehicle that is stopped with its lights flashing, you must change lanes to allow the vehicle extra space. If there is only one lane moving in your direction, or if changing lanes would be unsafe, you must slow down to a speed below the posted speed limit and give the stationary vehicle as much room as possible. Always slow down and be prepared to stop when you approach an emergency scene. You may pass another vehicle if the line dividing your lane from the lane you wish to enter is a fill in the blank line. A. Broken white. B. Double solid yellow. C. Solid yellow. D. Solid white. A. Broken white. White lines separate traffic lanes traveling in the same direction. You may cross broken white lines to pass, as long as the passing lane is clear.